From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. An indigenous leader in Colombia's Cauca department has been assassinated. 25-year-old Nasa Edwin Dagua Ipia was the traditional authority of the Huellas Caloto Indigenous community. He's the 36th indigenous person murdered since August 7 of this year. That's the day when the government of Iván Duque took office.
Voilà une classe qui se tient sage.
Following widespread condemnation of police brutality, videos of the arrest of hundreds of students in Paris suburb has caused outrage. They were protesting against the government's proposed educational reforms. Videos show them being forced to kneel in rows. However, Interior Minister Christophe Castaner has defended police actions, describing it as necessary.
Over the course of several days, what we have observed is that the high school students involved in the strikes were joined by about 100 individuals with masks and sticks and flammable materials with the firm intention to come into conflict with the police. These are not student movements, but rather urban violence.
Most tourist sites across the country will be closed on Saturday over fears of disruptions due to the mass protests expected on that day. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said that 89,000 police officers will be deployed on Saturday and warned residents to stay indoors.
Never since 2005, because we are facing people who are not here to protest, but to smash, and we want to have the means not to give them a free rein. We have mobilized a considerable amount of forces, 8,000 in Paris, which is much more than last Saturday, and in total for France, not 65,000, but 89,000. So it's truly an exceptional mobilization.
Our correspondent in Paris, Sergio Romero, has more on it.
Protests here in France have been called for Saturday, December 8th in La Bastille Square for 10 a.m. local time. The Yellow Vests have said and have asked for the demonstrations in Paris to be peaceful and without fatalities. All this after Macron's government alluded to ideas about a possible civil war. In many of his statements, he also insisted that demonstrations are going to be linked to destitution and massacre. This is how he's referred to the protests. Also, the French government has said that many groups have been identified as armed for tomorrow. The Yellow Vests insist that they want to show their rejection to the policies of Macron, to the cuts under neoliberal policies, as well as the cuts to people's salaries, their protection and pensions. Meanwhile, his popularity continues to fall and now sits at only 23% support. Meanwhile, more than 70% of people say that they sympathize with the Yellow Vests movement. This weekend will be intense. More than 90,000 policemen will be deployed throughout France and monuments will be closed, including the famous Eiffel Tower in Paris. Meanwhile, National Assembly prepares to meet on Monday. The leftist parties are looking for support to do away with Macron's neoliberal policies, but they only have 62 deputies out of the more than 280 that they need for this motion to pass.
Venezuela is preparing for Sunday's municipal elections. The campaign period lasted 15 days, during which political organizations and candidates put forward their proposals. Sunday's vote marks election number 25 over the last 20 years. The mayor for the municipality of Libertador in Caracas encouraged voter participation for Sunday.
On Sunday, a new electoral process begins. All of the Venezuelan people will need to exercise their democratic right to vote. This is the election number 25 in 20 years of revolution. We extend the invitation to the Venezuelan people to vote at the same time that we are continuing the distribution process of food and basic necessity goods. We invite everyone to participate in this democratic process for our revolution.
And President Nicolás Maduro has returned from his Russia trip. He remarked on agreements signed with Russian President Vladimir Putin and spoke about the new OPEC agreement.
We have returned to Venezuela with good news of the agreement that has been reached in Vienna to maintain the strategic alliance between OPEC and non-OPEC countries. I want to thank Russia, President Vladimir Putin, Saudi Arabia, and all the OPEC and non-OPEC countries for the reduction of 1.2 million barrels per day. This will allow for the stabilization of oil prices. It's going to be a fair price for all producers and all consumers, and also fair for the world economy.
President Maduro was referring to a meeting of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. The meeting was held in Austria with non-OPEC producers and led by Russia. The OPEC president said that an agreement has been made to cut oil production by 1.2 million barrels per day for 6 months, starting in January.
What's your expectation for today?
I hope we'll smile at the end. Still some negotiations.
Agreement or not? Yesterday, long discussion.
I hope we'll have agreement.
Have you asked for executive?
Venezuela will assume the presidency of OPEC from January 2019. The Venezuelan oil minister confirmed that the Venezuelan delegation is ready to take up the responsibilities of leadership. He added that Venezuela will present new strategies to stabilize the price of crude oil.
The
cooperation between the OPEC and non-OPEC countries was an initiative of our president, Nicolas Maduro. Now we are evaluating how to develop this cooperation. It's very important that the OPEC and non-OPEC countries work together as best they can to maintain the stability of fair prices. That's best for the social and economic development of the peoples of the world.
Political parties of the BRICS countries have been meeting in South Africa at the invitation of the African National Congress. Ayesha Ismail reports from Pretoria.
Delegates further acknowledged the supreme sacrifices made by freedom fighters and the international solidarity movement who supported the national liberation struggle for freedom and democracy. The conference was held in the context of re-emerging threats such as narrow ultra-nationalism, the offensive against the rules-based multilateral system, including the trade wars, regime changes, and imposed sanctions. The dialogue focused on inclusive economic development, peace and stability, multilateralism, and the fourth industrial revolution.
We engage in a dialogue which will actually change the world, because we don't believe, all of us agreed today, we don't believe in a unipolar world. We believe that in multilateralism, we believe that we need to address the challenges of unemployment amongst women and youth, generally across the globe.
But did the gathering of leaders achieve their objectives?
We are very confident that the world and the progressive forces in the world are moving in the right direction.
The BRICS Political Parties Plus also supported the BRICS resolution, calling for the establishment of the BRICS Ratings Agency.
We said we are tired of being dictated to by the ratings agencies from the West, which are in most cases manipulated to impose their agendas in our countries. And we are saying, let's have our own, which are going to assess us and ensure that they rate us on an objective assessment. But we can also be able to counter what comes from the other side, because it's largely manipulated information to suit the other agendas and causes us to succumb and subject ourselves in their interests.
Dlamini said the focus will now shift to the implementation of what had been agreed upon during the 10th BRICS Summit, as well as by the BRICS Political Parties Plus dialogue in Pretoria. Aisha Ismail, Telesur, Pretoria.
Germany's Christian Democratic Union has chosen a new leader to succeed Angela Merkel. Annegret Kramp was elected at the Paris conference in Hamburg. She will take over from Merkel, who has been at the helm of the CDU for nearly 2 decades. Merkel is leaving the party leadership with her popularity at an all-time low. Now to Palestine, where the Great March of Return protests resumed on the Gaza Strip. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, at least 17 Palestinians were injured by Israeli live ammunition, and at least 35 sustained suffocation from tear gas. Our Middle East correspondent Nayara Tardo sent us this report.
On Thursday, the United Nations rejected the United States resolution against the Islamic resistance movement Hamas for firing missiles in retaliation from the occupied Palestinian territories towards Israel. The U.S. drafted resolution obtained 87 votes in favor and 57 votes against, with 33 abstentions. China, Russia, and all Arab countries opposed the document, which was defended by the United States ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. The United States attempted to blame Hamas for the launching of missiles, this despite the fact that Israel's frequent attacks on the Gaza Strip during the month of November have been some of the most severe since the War of 2014 in the border area. In this time period, more than 200 Palestinians have been killed, with the vast majority of them being killed during the Great March of Return protests held each Friday, a protest which is strongly repressed by Israeli forces. At the time of this report, Gaza's Ministry of Health has reported that during today's Great March of Return protests, at least 17 Palestinians have been injured as Israeli forces attempted to suppress the demonstration with all sorts of weaponry.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. An indigenous leader in Colombia's Cauca department has been assassinated. 25-year-old Nasa Edwin Dagua Ipia was the traditional governor of the Huellas Caloto Indigenous community. He's the 36th indigenous person murdered since August 7th of this year. That's the day when the government of Iván Duque took office. Now to Cuba, where many people have activated new mobile data plans. The service became available on the island on Thursday. Cuba's telecommunications company FtS is rolling out the service to mobile users over a 3-day period. Despite the barriers presented by the U.S. blockade, Cuba has concrete plans to expand technological access.
Sí, ya la estamos usando.
Yes, we're already using the service, and now we have to see how everything develops, and if there are any issues. So far, it's been great.
I believe it's a great thing for Cubans because now we have communication with the outside world, our family members, and also be better informed. It's a true benefit for all Cubans to have internet on our phones.
New labor laws have taken effect in Cuba. The regulation change applies to private sector jobs. The biggest change is the ability for Cubans to work in more than one approved self-employment activity or private job. Licenses will again be authorized for 26 activities which have been suspended. There are about 500,000 self-employed workers in Cuba. They represent 13% of the country's workforce. In Argentina, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo have celebrated the 38th edition of their March of Resistance. It commemorates their struggle for human rights, which started after the disappearance of their children and grandchildren during the last military dictatorship. The mothers also joined forces with social movements to condemn current institutional violence by Macri's government. They are demanded answers from their children killers who still deny knowing their whereabouts. Argentinian police have fired rubber bullets and tear gas at Terminator workers who were protesting at the Red Crest Company's compound. Officers took aim after workers tried to block trucks leaving the plant. Close to 200 employees have been laid off. Early this year, President Mauricio Macri gave employees the false assurance that their jobs were not in jeopardy. He was speaking during an event at the same work site. A recent report from the National Migration Institute has revealed that more than 9,000 Central American migrants remain in Mexico, and they're facing a new round of challenges. The report shows that just over 5,000 from the first caravan are living in hostels. This while some are residing in deplorable conditions. Close to 300 people from the second caravan are seeking refugee status. Human rights organizations have asked the authorities to ensure that migrants are not rendered homeless. Our correspondent in Tijuana, Mexico, Pablo Perez, has more.
Here we are outside this camp, a few meters away from the Chaparral border crossing. It's one of the most traveled border crossings between Tijuana and San Diego. It is here that men and women migrants began a hunger strike 9 days ago. They're demanding that authorities speed up the humanitarian asylum process to enter the United States. The Central American migrant caravan has traveled 4,000 kilometers to reach the U.S. border. However, there has been a small percentage of asylum requests processed daily by U.S. authorities. The migrants said that only 30 requests are processed daily, and this is not nearly enough, considering hundreds of migrants who are currently on waiting list in addition to the many who have just arrived here. They will have to wait more than 2 months, further complicating their legal status in the border city of Tijuana.
Thank you, Paulo, for that report. We continue with our special reports on the Cuban doctors who work in Brazil. We bring you the story of Dr. Bereileses Labrada Guevara, who was in charge of 5 communities in the small town of Prado in the northeast of Brazil.
The village of Abril is one of the oldest in the Brazilian state of Bahia, and it was one of 5 communities that Cuban doctor Bereileses Labrada Guevara served for over 2 years. During her time, she changed people's lives in more ways than one.
She decreased the amount of medicine we took and changed our eating habits. We no longer consume sugary soft drinks or buy processed food like we did before.
Now it's for these campesinos to say goodbye to Dr. Guevara.
She was really a person who was dedicated to help people, to cure the human. There are doctors who only think of money, who run clinics, but have no real commitment to serve people.
She didn't have patience. We were her friends. All of her patients are very sad that she is leaving. Some even got sick when they heard.
Now we arrive to the beautiful La Playa de la Pasión, another hard-to-reach community. It's home to people like Maria Elena, who has seen many doctors, but none of them were able to diagnose her symptoms. But that all changed when she saw Dr. Guevara, who identified that she had kidney problems.
I came to consult with her, and she prescribed me a medicine that would improve my condition. And now that I take it, thank God I don't have problems anymore. I took some medical tests and showed them to her, and she said I'm now healthy. She's the best doctor La Playa de la Pasión has ever had.
In a makeshift clinic on the beach, the Cuban doctor went to great lengths to apply all the medical knowledge she learned in her home country.
It was like having a private doctor. She provided very personalized consultations. That's the difference. She always paid special attention to her patients.
More than 8,500 Cuban doctors have left Brazil after the country's president-elect Jair Bolsonaro criticized the More Doctors program. But all these medical professionals will be certified for the work they've done.
I know it's over. The More Doctors program has ended for Cubans in Brazil. But our work here will be a part of history. What we did here will be in the history books, and we won't be forgotten.
Dr. Guevara bid a final heartfelt farewell to all the people that were more than just patients to her. She will now go back to Cuba to begin a new mission to help people in need.
Brazil's president-elect Jair Bolsonaro will abolish the country's human rights ministry. He has appointed an evangelical pastor to run a new ministry overseeing women, family, human rights, and indigenous people. The new minister, Damares Alves, opposes abortion and criticizes feminism. She also co-founded a missionary group that evangelizes in indigenous communities. Feminists, indigenous, and LGBTQ activists fear human rights will be downgraded under the new ministry. Cuba's capital of Havana is enjoying its annual film festival celebrating new Latin American movies. It is now the 40th edition, and Cuba has nominated 13 films. Telesur spoke with some of the participants hoping to win a Coral Prize.
These are scenes from Insumisa, the most recent feature film from Cuban director Fernando Perez and Swiss producer Laura Cazador. Insumisa tells the story of a Swiss woman who arrives in the Cuban city of Baracoa in the 19th century dressed as a man and bearing the name Enrique Faber. She practices medicine and marries a local young woman. It's a dramatic tale based on real events.
It's a film that doesn't want just to dwell on themes of gender, but rather wants to portray a much more modern image. A woman who faced a closed-off existence and broke through all the barriers in front of her.
Director Alejandro Gil makes his appearance in this edition of the festival with a historic drama. His proposal is Innocence, the story of the most moving event in 19th century Havana, the execution by firing squad of 8 medical students.
It's a film based on real facts, a film that is telling a real story. So it doesn't matter what you know about history or things that can manipulate you politically to ensure that you don't look any deeper.
Mantis Nest is another Cuban feature film hoping to win a Coral. The film, directed by Arturo Soto, tells the story of a love triangle between 2 men and a woman lasting for more than 40 years. One morning in 1994, all 3 were found dead.
It may look like a thriller and have the structure of a thriller, but at the end it's a story about strong patience. It's getting more difficult to be included in this festival because they are getting more selective every time. To just participate is an honor.
2 animated films are competing in the festival. One of them is A Very Close Encounter by Paul Chaviano, a film which tells fabulous stories from the Cuban countryside with fantastical characters.
It's a stop-motion film in which figures are really moved frame by frame and based on a story paying tribute to the work of Samuel Feijó. It tells the tale of a campesino who doesn't believe anything happening around him, who has close encounters with these deities.
The International Festival of New Latin American Film will end on its 40th edition with some of the best cinema from the region. 20 feature films, 22 shorts and medium-length productions, and a whole lot more that can be enjoyed by cinema lovers.
More news in a minute. Stay with us.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The peace talks between the Yemeni government and Houthi fighters has entered to its second day in Sweden. A minister from Yemen's Saudi-backed government said a military offensive on the port city of Hudeida, held by Houthi fighters, is still an option if they refuse to withdraw from the city. These talks are being mediated by the United Nations. This is the first time in 2 years that the two sides meet in a long-standing conflict that has caused massive starvation in Yemen.
First, the release of detainees, those in custody and the disappeared, as well the prisoners, comprehensively. Second, Sana'a airport. Third, the delivery of humanitarian and to all Yemeni provinces. Fourth, the issue of Hodeida and the siege of Taiz.
The European Commission has called on Switzerland to quickly decide to accept a draft treaty on future bilateral ties with the European Union. This after Switzerland ignored an ultimatum from its biggest trading partner, saying it will first consult its domestic power brokers. Switzerland risks facing EU sanctions over the integration deal. 2 attacks by allied Democratic Forces rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo have killed at least 17 people. Sources say that 12 of the victims are civilians, while 5 are soldiers who died when the rebels attacked military barrack. The ADF militia was created in 1989 by Muslims to oppose Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who was seen as hostile to Muslims.
They arrived in the village and immediately started shooting, looting the shop and setting fire to the shop. At the same time, they asked my aunt to come from under the bed, and if we refused, they would burn us alive. So I told my aunt, we go out, and if we die, then we die.
A search is still on for 7 migrants who are missing after a boat capsized in the waters of the Dominican Republic. The U.S. Coast Guard helped rescue 21 of the migrants who were on board. The boat was spotted on Thursday. The migrants are believed to be Dominicans who were headed east to the nearby U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. And with this, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telestorenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telestory English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.